In a room lit only by oil lamps, a scribe's hand trembles as he presses wedge-shaped marks into wet clay. He's documenting death, not battle, not famine, not flood, disease, spreading through his city like invisible fire. He writes, "The fever came, many have fallen, the breathing grows difficult, the dead are many." This isn't 1918, this isn't 2020, this is 2000 BC. 4,000 years ago, the world's first cities, and humanity's first recorded pandemic. What you're about to hear are the oldest epidemic records in human existence, written in cuneiform, pressed into clay, by people who watched their world die around them. They documented symptoms, social collapse, religious desperation, government responses, quarantine attempts. And when you read what they wrote, it sounds disturbingly familiar, because pandemics don't change, only the technology we use to fight them. Before we enter the darkness of the plague, you need to understand what existed before. What was about to be tested? Southern Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Around 3500 BC, something revolutionary happens here. Cities, not villages, not settlements, actual cities. The first in human history. Uruk, Uar, Lagash, Nippur, Eridu. City-states with populations reaching tens of thousands. Massive temple complexes called ziggurats piercing the sky. The Sumerians weren't just building big. They were innovating everything. Writing, cuneiform, the world's first written language. Mathematics, base, 60 counting system we still use for time and angles. The wheel, revolutionizing transport and pottery. Irrigation, complex canal systems turning desert into farmland. Legal codes, written laws governing society. Organized religion, temple complexes with professional priest classes. Bureaucracy, administrative systems tracking resources, populations, trades. This was civilization, the blueprint for everything that came after. But cities created something else, something the Sumerians didn't anticipate. Dense populations, thousands of people living in close proximity, sharing water sources, trading goods, traveling between cities. Perfect conditions for disease. Modern epidemiologists understand what the Sumerians discovered the hard way. Cities are epidemiological tinderboxes. In small scattered villages, a disease outbreak affects maybe a few hundred people before burning itself out. Isolated communities can't sustain epidemic spread. But in a city of 50,000, with trade routes connecting to other cities, with merchants traveling between Uar and Uruk, between Lagash and Nippur, diseases don't just spread, they explode. Archaeological evidence suggests Sumerian cities experienced periodic disease outbreaks from their earliest existence. Burial patterns show sudden spikes in mortality. Texts mention years of pestilence. But around 2000 BC, something changed. The outbreaks became catastrophic. Population levels crashed. Some cities were abandoned. And scribes, those patient record keepers who documented everything from grain shipments to royal decrees, began writing about the disease itself. Those tablets, pressed into wet clay, fired in kilns, buried in collapsed buildings. They survived for 4,000 years, waiting to tell us their story. The discovery of Sumerian plague records didn't happen all at once. It emerged slowly as archaeologists excavated ancient cities and Assyriologists translated thousands of clay tablets. Most Sumerian texts are administrative, accounts of barley rations, temple offerings, legal disputes, staggeringly boring if you're not an accountant. But scattered among them are different texts, medical texts, incantations, prayers to healing gods, and administrative records that suddenly, dramatically, show crisis. Let me show you what they found. From a medical text discovered at Nippur, dated to approximately 2000 BC. If a man's body is hot and his eyes are inflamed, and coughing seizes him, and his phlegm is thick and yellow, and his breathing is labored, this is the epidemic disease. It spreads from house to house. Many will die. That's a clinical description. Symptoms, prognosis, recognition of contagion. 4,000 years ago, but perhaps more revealing are the administrative tablets. These show the disease's impact on society. From UR, circa 1900 BC, ration distribution records, month 1, grain distributed to 4,200 workers. Month 2, grain distributed to 4,150 workers. Month 3, grain distributed to 3,890 workers. Month 4, grain distributed to 2,100 workers. Month 5, grain distributed to records incomplete. Half the workforce gone. In 4 months. The scribe who made that last entry probably died before completing it. The Sumerians believed disease came from angry gods. So temples filled with prayers, incantations, and desperate offerings. Prayer to Nanazu, god of healing, found at Lagash. O Nanazu, lord of life, the disease walks through the city. It enters the houses of the rich and poor alike. Even the righteous fall. Even children die. We have made offerings. We have performed the rites. Why do you not hear us? Why do you not stop the pestilence? Imagine the desperation, the confusion. They're doing everything their religion tells them. Sacrificing sheep, burning incense, performing rituals. And people keep dying. Some of the most haunting texts are the Lamentations, poetic works mourning destroyed cities. The Lamentation for UR, written after the city's collapse around 2000 BC, includes passages that might reference epidemic disease. In the streets where festivals were held, corpses were piled. In the places where the city's dances took place, people were stacked in heaps. The blood of the land like bronze and lead. Bodies dissolving like fat in the sun. Heads scattered like pottery shards. Whether this describes battle, disease, or both, the imagery is apocalyptic. Cities don't just fall. They die. Slowly. Horribly. If you're feeling that eerie recognition, these ancient descriptions sounding way too familiar, you need to subscribe. Because we're about to decode exactly what disease killed these cities. And comment. Does knowing ancient pandemics followed the same patterns as modern ones make you more worried or more reassured? Now, let's diagnose a 4,000-year-old plague. Modern medical anthropologists and epidemiologists have analyzed these ancient texts, trying to diagnose diseases from cuneiform descriptions. It's forensic pathology, but the victim is an entire civilization. Let's look at what the tablets consistently describe. Fever, mentioned in nearly every medical text about epidemic disease. Respiratory symptoms, difficulty breathing, coughing, thick phlegm, inflammation, especially of eyes and throat. Rapid progression, texts mention death occurring within days. High mortality, administrative records show population crashes. Contagion, explicit recognition that disease spreads house to house. All ages affected, though children and elderly mentioned as particularly vulnerable. So what matches this profile? Theory 1. Bubonic plague. Some scholars argue for Yersinia pestis, the bacterium causing bubonic plague, later famous as the Black Death. Evidence for high mortality, rapid spread, historical presence of plague bacteria in rodent populations throughout Mesopotamia. Evidence against Sumerian texts don't clearly describe buboes, the characteristic swollen lymph nodes. The disease progression described seems more respiratory than bubonic. Theory 2. Pandemic influenza or respiratory virus. The respiratory symptoms, fever, coughing, breathing difficulty, strongly suggest influenza or similar viral pandemic. Evidence for symptom match is nearly perfect. Influenza has caused catastrophic pandemics throughout history, can spread rapidly in dense populations. Evidence against influenza rarely causes complete population collapse. The mortality described seems higher than typical flu. Theory 3. Syndemic, multiple diseases simultaneously. Modern epidemiologists recognize that disasters often involve multiple diseases acting together. Malnutrition weakens immune systems. One disease makes people vulnerable to others. Typhoid, dysentery, respiratory infections, and plague could have struck simultaneously. Evidence for the variety of symptoms described, the absolutely catastrophic mortality, the societal collapse. Here's where recent research adds crucial context. Studies of climate and ecological collapse in ancient Mesopotamia reveal that around 2200 to 2000 BC, the region experienced severe environmental stress, drought, crop failures, famine, ecological network collapse. Research by Yekel and colleagues on ancient Egyptian ecological collapse shows how interconnected these systems are. When ecosystems fail, disease follows. Malnourished populations, contaminated water sources, livestock dying, increased contact between humans and disease-carrying animals as resources shrink. The Sumerian plague wasn't just a disease outbreak. It was an ecological catastrophe. Disease was the executioner, but environmental collapse loaded the gun. The Sumerians tried to understand disease. Their medical texts show sophisticated observation from a diagnostic manual. If the patient's skin is hot and dry, and his urine is dark, and his tongue is coated white, the fever demon has entered him. If in addition his chest rattles when breathing, death is likely within 7 days. That's clinical observation, pattern recognition, prognosis. They didn't understand germ theory. They couldn't see bacteria or viruses, but they could observe, document, and predict. Their treatments, mostly herbal remedies, incantations, and isolation of the sick, were hit or miss. But the impulse to understand and systematize medical knowledge, that's science. 4,000 years ago. Here's where the story becomes uncomfortably relevant, because the Sumerian response to pandemic follows patterns that repeat throughout history. Patterns we saw in 1918. Patterns we saw in 2020. Human nature doesn't change. Phase 1. Denial and religious response. Early tablets show authorities attributing disease to divine punishment. Temple offerings increase. Prayers intensify. The assumption, if we appease the gods, the disease will stop. This isn't ignorance. It's the paradigm they have. Just as medieval Europeans blamed sin, just as some modern populations initially denied COVID-19 severity. When facing the incomprehensible, humans reach for familiar frameworks. Phase 2. Recognition of contagion. Later tablets show evolving understanding. Medical texts explicitly state the disease spreads from person to person. Fragment from an administrative text, possibly from UR. Let no man enter the house of the afflicted. Let the sick remain in their dwellings. Let food be brought to them but not consumed in their presence. Let the dead be removed quickly but touched only by appointed persons. That's quarantine. That's contact tracing. That's designated healthcare workers. 4,000 years ago. Phase 3. Social collapse. As mortality mounted, administrative records show system failure. Labor shortages crippling irrigation maintenance. Crop failures from lack of agricultural workers. Breakdown of trade networks as merchants refuse to travel. Abandonment of villages and eventually entire cities. Collapse of centralized authority as administrators die. One text fragment mentions those who fled the city leaving the gates unguarded. Refugees spreading disease to new areas. Social trust evaporating. Sound familiar? Phase 4. Long-term consequences. Archaeological evidence shows that some Sumerian cities never recovered. UR shrank dramatically. Smaller cities were abandoned entirely. The political map of Mesopotamia changed. Power shifted. New dynasties emerged. The old order died with the plague victims. Pandemics don't just kill people. They kill civilizations. They redraw maps. They determine which cultures survive and which disappear. Let me show you something chilling. The pattern of Sumerian plague response matches modern pandemic response almost exactly. Ancient Sumer. Initial denial, religious explanation, recognition of contagion, quarantine measures, healthcare worker shortages, high mortality, economic disruption, trade collapse, social breakdown, refugees fleeing, long-term demographic and political change, COVID-19 pandemic, 2020-2023. Initial denial, alternative explanations, recognition of spread, Lockdown measures healthcare worker burnout, high mortality. Rates economic disruption. Supply chain collapse, social divisions, population movements, long-term demographic and political change for 1,000 years. Scientific revolutions. Medical advances that would seem like magic to the Sumerians. And yet, the pattern is identical. If this pattern recognition is hitting you hard, hit that like button. And comment, what lesson from ancient pandemics do you think modern society still hasn't learned? Because the conclusion might surprise you. So what do these 4,000-year-old clay tablets teach us? First, civilization is more fragile than we think. The Sumerians created the blueprint for urban civilization. Writing, law, mathematics, architecture. They seemed invincible. Disease brought them to their knees. No matter how advanced a society becomes, it's always vulnerable to pandemic disease. Complexity doesn't protect you. Sometimes it makes you more vulnerable because there are more interconnected systems to fail. Second, human responses to existential threats are remarkably consistent. Denial, then fear, then desperate measures, then social breakdown, then adaptation or collapse. We've been running this playbook for 4,000 years. Understanding this pattern helps us prepare for next time, because there will be a next time. Third, recording history matters desperately. Those Sumerian scribes, writing on clay tablets while people died around them, they were creating a message for the future. They wanted us to know, to understand, to learn from their suffering. Modern pandemic documentation, medical records, personal accounts, scientific data will teach future generations about us, about how we faced COVID-19, about our failures and successes. We owe it to the future to be honest. Fourth, this will happen again. Since the Sumerian plagues, humanity has faced countless pandemics. Antonine Plague, Justinian Plague, Black Death, smallpox, Spanish flu, HIV, AIDS, COVID-19. Epidemiologists are clear. Another pandemic is inevitable. Climate change, ecological disruption, global travel, dense megacities. All the conditions that enabled Sumerian plague outbreaks exist today, amplified. The question isn't if, it's when, and whether we'll have learned anything. Despite their lack of germ theory, the Sumerians got some things remarkably right. They recognized contagion and implemented isolation. They documented symptoms systematically. They attempted to maintain food distribution to quarantined populations. They designated specific people to handle the sick and dead. They recorded everything for posterity. With ancient technology and pre-scientific understanding, they did the best they could. The question for us, with modern technology and scientific understanding, are we doing the best we can? There's a tablet in the British Museum, pressed into clay around 2000 BC. It's a medical text describing epidemic disease. The scribe's handwriting becomes shakier toward the end. The wedge marks less precise. The final line is incomplete. Did the scribe die? Flee? We'll never know. But that incomplete tablet is a monument. Not to kings or gods or military victories. It's a monument to human perseverance, to the drive to document, to leave knowledge behind. The Sumerian plagues killed thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. They toppled dynasties. They redrew the map of civilization. But they didn't kill human hope, human curiosity, the determination to understand, to learn, to warn those who come after. Those clay tablets, fired in ancient kilns, buried in ruins, excavated millennia later, still speak. They say, we were here, we suffered, we learned. Don't repeat our mistakes. Are we listening? If this journey into humanity's first recorded pandemic opened your eyes to how history echoes through time, subscribe to this channel. We connect ancient mysteries to modern realities. Hit that like button. Your engagement helps this content reach people who need to hear it. And here's your mission. Comment with one thing you think modern pandemic response could learn from ancient Sumer. Be specific. Be thoughtful. And second question, do you think we're better prepared for the next pandemic than the Sumerians were for theirs? Defend your answer. I'll see you in the next investigation, where we prove that history's darkest moments teach the brightest lessons. Until then, remember those Sumerian scribes, writing in the shadow of death, leaving warnings pressed in clay. They're still warning us. For 1,000 years later, the question is, are we wise enough to listen?